first thing I need to do whenever we get back into the kitchen?
Wash your hands.
Wash your hands. So, anybody know how long you should wash your hands for?
Oh,
Yes, ma'am.
30 seconds to a minute.
Sing happy birthday. That's a good way. ABC's happy birthday. Use warm water and soap. So I'm gonna wash my hands. And we always have paper towels over here as well. We'll just use these real quick. And then there's something else wrong with my hands. I want you guys to look at them and tell me what's something that I need to do.
Your rings.
Take my rings off. Rings are a good breeding ground for bacteria. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I take those off. And then we always wear aprons in this kitchen. So there's two baskets. There's a white basket and a tan basket. So when you guys get back here, make sure you grab an apron from the white basket. That means that it's clean. So I'm going to slip this on real quick. And today we are making chocolate chip cookies. Anybody, can you tell me what the first step of a recipe says? When you're baking something, what do you need to do first?
Preheat the oven.
Preheat your oven. So, on our recipe, it says 375 degrees. But with our oven over here, it has a fan in it. So that means that it's going to dry out the cookies faster if we turn it on 375. So if you guys want to come over here, we're going to look at this oven so we can figure it out together.
Did I turn it far enough?
Huh? You're good. So come grab the round over here. So I want you guys to be able to learn how this oven works. So do you see this on/off button and it says light as well? See that? So we're going to turn it on and you hear the fan turn on. But we need to turn the fan on low. We learned that making cookies, if you have it on high, then it'll dry them out. So our temperature is at 325 degrees. And what did our recipe say to turn it on?
375.
And we're going to take it down 25 degrees. So if it said 375, what do we need to have it on? 350, that's correct. Okay, so we'll just turn this knob until it says 350. It says 350 degrees. A good way to check the oven if you want to know what the temperature is right now, just click this button. It's at 205 degrees right now. So we're going to head back to the island and we are going to get started. So our oven's on, and then something else important whenever you're making cookies especially is that your butter is softened.
So
What does soften mean?
Microwave
it's not
for 5 seconds.
It's not cold. Preferably you just want to leave it out on the counter. If you microwave it, then it'll get spots in it that are completely melted and that changes the texture of the butter. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to unwrap these, stick them in this bowl. This recipe calls for 2 sticks of butter. So make sure we get these in the bowl. And the method that we're about to start is called the conventional method. So we're going to get into a little bit of what the conventional method is. Basically it just means starting with creaming your butter and your sugars, and we'll talk about what our sugars are, and then adding your dry ingredients a little bit, 1/3 at a time. So I have a hand mixer here. Stand mixer is one of the bigger mixers.
Yeah,
I've
it's
seen a
to
KitchenAid.
plug it in, right?
But this is a hand mixer. So we're gonna double check this. Before I plug it in, we're gonna put our beaters in because if I were to stick our beaters in and it was turned on, my hands would be really hurt. So
Yeah.
take a look at the bottom of this mixer. Do you see the difference between the 2 beaters? Do you see how that one has the flat part and that's just straight? You see that, Edward? See the flat part versus the straight?
Oh, I already know.
So that makes a big difference. So this one has that
Gotta
flat
line
part.
it up.
So we're gonna stick that in there. Hear it snap. Do the same thing for this one. Double check it. Make sure I'm sticking them in the right one. Hear it snap. Okay. So make sure it's turned off because once again, we don't want it going with our hands on it. So what I always do is I go ahead and stick it in my butter. That way if there's a malfunction, it's in the bowl and not on the counter. Plug it in. And we're going to just start by creaming the butter. There's no sugar in this, it's just butter, but that way the butter is softened a little bit more. So start just on a low speed. We can always turn it up. We just want it to be softened a little bit more. And it's kind of caught in my beaters, but that'll be okay. We just want to get it started. So, I'm going to turn that over. And I'm going to go ahead and use my rubber scraper to go ahead and get this butter out of the beaters. That way we can start measuring our dry ingredients. Someone remind me, what is this method called that we're doing? Conventional, awesome. Okay. Wants to stay stuck on the beaters. So, just gonna set this aside and we're gonna start measuring our dry ingredients. So, our recipe calls for flour, baking soda, and salt to be mixed together in a separate bowl. So we have 2 1/4 cups of flour. Have you guys ever measured flour before into a measuring cup? So how did you measure it whenever you measured your flour? Did you just stick the scooper in there, the measuring cup in there? That's awesome. So this recipe, 2 1/4 cups of flour, so help me keep track. I'm going to go ahead and stir it because whenever you buy flour from the grocery store, it's been shipped and packed and it's been compressed. So there's no air in this, so we want there to be air. Otherwise we'll end up with really tough cookies. So I'm going to spoon this into my measuring cup after it's been stirred. And I have a knife somewhere. It's hiding. And you see the flat side, not the side that you butter your toast with that flat edge, you see that? I'm going to take that and scrape off the excess flour because we don't want that in our recipe, and just go ahead and pour it into my separate bowl. How many more 1 cups do I need?
1 cup and 1/2.
1 cup and 1/4. So, making sure I stir this before I put it in our bowl. Now we're just missing 1/4 cup. Do the same thing over again. You can hear our oven heating up. Okay. So that is all the flour that we're going to need for this recipe. So, next we are going to measure our baking soda, not baking powder. Some recipes call for both. This recipe is specifically baking soda. Can you tell us how much baking soda it calls for, Rosie?
1 tablespoon.
Do you know what that is?
1 tablespoon.
That's 1 teaspoon. So, TSP or a little t in a recipe means a teaspoon. A big T or TBSP means tablespoon. So baking soda helps with how recipes rise. So if you get too much or too little, it really can mess up the recipe. It's a science experiment. So we're going to go ahead and pour in our 1 teaspoon of baking soda. And then what else do we need? 1 teaspoon of salt. So something that's really easy to do when you get in the kitchen is just go ahead, pour your salt over your flour mixture. What could happen if I did that?
Too salty.
Too salty. And who wants a cookie that's too salty?
Not me.
So I'm going to do this
Wyatt.
over my measuring cup. See, I got a little bit too much. I'm going to take my fancy knife wherever I put it. There it is. Thank you, Wyatt. And I'm just going to do the same thing that I did with my flour. Scoop it off. Pour it into my bowl. Set this aside. And I'm going to use my spoon, my big spoon, and stir it all together. So this is my dry ingredients. So for the conventional method, do you remember how much of the dry ingredients goes in at a time?
1/3.
1/3, correct. So not 1/3 of a cup, but 1/3 of this mixture. So now that that's all nice and together, we're going to move on to creaming our butter and our sugars. So that's part of the conventional method, is you add your sugars to your butter, and then we'll add in the eggs one at a time. So we're going to start with our brown sugar, which I think I might have left it over there. Let's see. Might have been put up in the cabinet. Yeah, it just got put away. But do you guys see how I have all of my ingredients out already other than the brown sugar? You see how we had everything, our measuring cups. I'm not running around the kitchen looking for everything. That is actually a cooking term called mise en place. And so what that means is put into place. So it's so much easier when you have everything out, your measuring utensils out, that way you're not scrambling around in the kitchen. So for this recipe, I'm going to use 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar. And most recipes, when they call for brown sugar, they say packed. Do you guys know what packed means? Compressed into the measuring cup. Awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scoop my measuring cup into this bag, and I'm going to have the bag help me. I'm just going to take my hand and press it into the measuring cup. So let the bag do all your work. So what's going to happen when I pour it in there is it's going to stay in its shape, unlike the granulated sugar. As you can see, there's our exact 3/4 of a cup. So I'm going to use my granulated sugar. This is just what you'd see in your kitchen, normal sugar. And I also need 3/4 of a cup of sugar. I keep losing my knife. What? I think you're taking it over there. Okay, so same thing with my flour, just except this time you don't have to put air into it. Sorry, that's what I was looking for. Measure it, level it off, pour it in, and we're done. That's that. So, moving on, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna have my rubber spatula close because I have a feeling we're gonna need it. And our recipe says, add eggs, beat butter, sugars, and vanilla until creamy. So, what's something that I forgot? I have my sugars in there with my butter. I need my vanilla. So, our recipe calls for how much vanilla? Somebody see it on there?
1 teaspoon.
1 teaspoon. Do I want to pour it directly over my...
Nope.
Nope. I don't know if you guys have ever made the mistake of tasting vanilla. It smells good, but it doesn't.
It don't taste like it
Doesn't
smells.
taste like it smells. Okay. So, set that aside. And we're going to get this started. We want this to be creamy. So that's part of the conventional method, is we're creaming our butters and our sugars. You guys all see it? Scoot these out of the way so you can see everything that's going on. There we go. Thank you. Awesome. So, some butter chunks in there. In a second, I'll grab my rubber scraper and scrape that down. So I'm going to just take a pause, use my rubber scraper, get those sides, because we want all that butter to be in there. We want all that fat in there. So if I didn't use butter, and butter's a fat, can somebody tell me what else might be used in a cookie recipe? Shortening. Shortening, that's awesome. So sometimes you know that as Crisco comes in stick form and in a big container. So I know some recipes use half of that, half butter. Some use all fat. But this recipe we're using butter. So both of those are fats. So you see how it went from the clumps to now it's starting to see the beater tracks. Scrape it down one more time, and then we're going to start adding our eggs. And how many go in at a time for our eggs?
1.
1 at a time. We have 2 in our recipe. I don't know if you guys have seen, but my hands have sometimes touched this batter. Like sometimes when I scrape it, I end up with a little bit of batter on my hands. And that's why it's so important to, like, if you wipe your face, you touch your hair, you have to keep washing your hands because, I mean, my hands have batter on it and that's just going right back into the bowl. So here we have our eggs. Conventional method asks for all ingredients to be at room temperature. So these eggs are room temperature. A lot of baking recipes will ask for your